This is a recommendation report for a feature in the Scripture Citation Index. The data was gathered together with my team, Group 6, for the CS308 Technical Communication class. My name is Jessica Smith, and I will be presenting our findings. The Scripture Citation app is an app that is used for those who wish to enhance their Scripture study using an index with all of the different citations of scriptures and things like that. Unfortunately, the app at first glance does not make a lot of sense to a beginner. For example, a user might say, "What are those numbers for?" under the book names. Now there's an explanation of the app overall, but this is hidden away in the little menu in the top right corner of the app screen, which is not normally open as you see on the screen here. It's normally a vertical ellipses, and the user would have to click on that in order to find these three options, which can make it difficult for users who may not be very technical savvy to find any instructions on how to use the app. Our approach to finding a solution to the difficulty that users faced was to compare the Scripture Citation Index to other apps that have different ways of presenting their explanation information. We tried to find apps that were similar to the citation index in purpose, meaning they had some sort of database or were presenting a lot of information. Here we found 4 other apps that we felt were similar enough to the citation index to give us the information that we would need to make our recommendation. We found 8 criteria that we would use to judge each of the apps using such techniques as heuristic evaluations and overall performance tests. These criteria will be covered in a future slide. We based our selection of possible solutions on what our comparison apps used. For example, the Smart News app made use of an interactive tutorial to show a new user how to navigate and use the app, whereas the Arduino app has a pop-up window that shows up over the main screen that gives the user information about the app. The other 2 apps had no help sections and were added to show both sides of the coin, so to speak, the side with help documents and the side without. The Scripture Citation Index already has an explanation document, but it is hidden away. So our 3 possible choices for solutions are to add an interactive tutorial, a welcome pop-up, or not do anything at all. We would then test to see which of those 3 would be the best as far as users go, and then we decided to move on to figuring out which of these would be best for the developers themselves. Our criteria that we mentioned earlier includes 2 sections. The first 3 criteria in this list describes the implementation of the solution, like what extra software or other external resource would need to be implemented. Would the cost to the user need to go up to offset the extra costs of implementing this solution? How much of the developer's time would this solution take? The bottom 5 criteria describe the usability of the app. These are user-specific and based off of several different types of heuristic evaluations. We wanted to look at how the different apps compared in things like performance, opening time, effectiveness, and ease of use. We could then make hypotheses for each of the solutions on how their implementation would affect the users. We gave each criteria a score for each of the apps. The criteria score was based on the definitions of the usability criteria that can be found in our final recommendation report, which we'll post a link to that in a future slide. For example, the criteria of appealing had a maximum score of 4 because there were 4 different aspects of the heuristic evaluation that we looked at in regards to the appeal of the app to users. We then aggregated the criteria scores into an overall score for the app. As you can see here, Smart News was the highest scoring app with a 22 out of 23 points possible. Smart News had perfect scores in things like performance, ease of use, and appealing, whereas the Scripture Citation Index received a score of 14 out of 23 with a perfect score in being effective. Here, you can see that the Physics Reference app received the lowest score, but also received a perfect score in the effective criteria. Now, there will always be some kind of bias, especially when it comes to usability comparisons. But in order to mitigate some of the bias that might occur in this experiment, the team and I each chose 2 criteria, and we rated each app according to our specific criteria. For example, I chose ease of use and appealing, and I rated each of the apps according to the definitions for those 2 criteria, ease of use and appealing. Going back to our 3 solution criteria, which were resources, cost to the user, and development time, here we compared the 2 possible solutions, interactive tutorial and the welcome pop-up. If you remember, the citation index app already had an explanation document, so we did not include that here. The interactive tutorial, as represented by the Smart News app, had a score of 22 out of 23 in usability requirements. But the tutorial would require more resources, which would lead to a possible increase of cost to the user, maybe going from free to having to pay for it, and would most likely take more than 3 months of development time to find the right resources and then implement them into the already existing structure. Whereas the welcome pop-up solution was represented by the Arduino reference app, which had a score of 19 out of 23 for the usability criteria, and would not require adding any external software to the interface. There would be no need to charge the user for added costs, and it would probably take less than 3 months of development time to take the existing explanation document and create a pop-up window for it to be displayed in. So based on that data and those criteria that we scored and used the apps to compare, we recommend creating a welcome pop-up dialog box to explain what the app does and how to navigate the app. We found that in our usability test, the Arduino reference app scored 19 out of 23 points in a usability criteria. So using a welcome pop-up dialog box would help the users to find the information that they need. It would be right there, and they wouldn't have to search for it. Here is the link to our final recommendation report, and thank you for listening or watching this presentation.